Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. Well, welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm very glad to be joined today by Marc Effron, who helps the world's largest and most successful companies improve the quality and the depth of their talent. As a founder and president of the Talent Strategy Group, he leads the firm's global consulting, education, executive search, and publishing businesses. He's also co-authored many books and articles and written many articles for the Harvard Business Review, publishing his best-selling book, The One-Page Talent Management, often called the Talent Management Bible. Marc is a sought-after speaker on talent management and leadership topics, both by corporations and conferences. Welcome to the program, Marc.
Thanks, Charles. Looking forward to our conversation.
Great. So today's episode is really going to be focused on the 8 steps of high performance. I love the format, the structure of the book, and I love all the great content that's scientifically proven, which we'll kind of unpack here in just a few minutes. But first, I'd love to hear more about you and really what got you interested in this topic.
Sure. I've always been fascinated with how do we win at work? Just that basic topic. How do you win at work? And because I know when I started my working career, it took me a long time to figure that out. And I saw a lot of other people moving very, very quickly. And some things they did I thought were okay. Other things they did I didn't like as much, but they still seemed to make a lot of progress. And so a lot of my career, both on the consulting side and on the corporate side, has been spent just trying to figure out what are the rules to success at work. And 8 steps is really the capture of that.
That's great to hear. And I love to get more in depth into this philosophy that you follow in the book, which is really based on Peter Drucker, that don't try to change yourself. You're unlikely to succeed, but work hard to improve the way you perform, which I think is pretty profound that many people just really don't capture or get.
When I did the original research for the book, I found it really interesting that in sorting through all this academic proof about what allows you to be a high performer at work, it really did net out to about half of our potential to win at work is unchangeable. It's intelligence, it's personality, even things like our socioeconomic background, things that have already been locked and loaded by the time you get to work, but that there is clearly at least half of that you control. And that's what the book is really all about.
And you're talking about that fixed 50%, which I'd love to go into just a little bit, just to let people know that that fixed 50 really, you can't change. It's pretty much fixed. It's socioeconomic status, it's looks, it's physical attractiveness, it's personality characteristics, and it's intelligence, which you mentioned in the book is the single largest predictor of performance, twice as powerful as any other element. So if you could just unpack those a little bit for us and give us some understanding of what those factors are.
Sure. And let's start with the one you mentioned last, intelligence. It is the single largest factor that predicts how far and how fast we go in life. Now, even with that, it predicts about a third, depends on which scientist you want to argue with, about a third of our success in life. But that's still a massively powerful element. Now, it's largely inherited. So you can either thank mom and dad for that or curse mom and dad for that, but you're not going to do a darned thing about it. And it directly influences how successful you are at work. Same thing with personality, largely inherited. There's a little bit of change possible when you're young, but by the time you enter the working world, that's over. Now, when I say personality, I do not mean behaviors. I mean kind of the core personality that may create behaviors. I do believe you're in 100% control of your own behaviors. I'm going to guess we'll dip into that topic a bit more later. And then things like socioeconomic background. Some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Some people have a more challenged upbringing. Either one of those is going to influence how you enter the working world. You can't do a darn thing about it. And as I write about, there's all the obvious appearance biases that get in our way, but there are even absolutely silly ones like a height bias. The science is clear for each inch you are above the average height. I think it's a 1% salary bonus because of that. Now, is any of that fair? Nope. That's all completely unfair, but you can't do anything about it. So don't worry about that. Focus on what you really can control.
And that's what your book really covers, that other 50% that's not fixed, because really you want to start achieving closer to your theoretical maximum performance. So Love for you to talk more about that and really what that means to an individual and what they can control.
That concept actually comes from weightlifting. And the very short story is that an Olympic weightlifting coach was just curious, how would you calculate the absolute maximum weight that an individual could lift? And he looked at all the dynamics, body arrangement and nutrition and sleep and training regimens, because it was an interesting question. What's the theoretical maximum? Let's apply that same construct to work. What's your theoretical maximum performance? And that doesn't mean working 24 hours a day, killing yourself, but for the normal 8, 9, 10, whatever you put in each day, how could you optimally configure what you do to get the absolute most performance? A lot of that starts with what we call in the book, it's the high performer mindset, which should be relatively uncontroversial, yet we've heard a little bit of screaming more recently about the first point. The first point is high performers tend to work harder than other people. And hard work often translates into more hours. Now, pre-pandemic, that was only a slightly controversial point. Post-pandemic, that has turned out to be a slightly more controversial point. But the math is pretty clear. Two equally matched people, one who can work 50 hours a week, one who can work 40, that 50-hour a week person is likely, not guaranteed, but likely going to contribute a bit more over that year. So, first element is high performers work harder. Second is they tend to sacrifice more. Now, sacrifice means there are things you would probably like to do other than working, and you're saying, I'm going to give that particular thing up for now in order to spend more time at work. That might be time with a family, it might be watching your favorite sports team, whatever you enjoy doing. And then, final point on that high performers mindset is you recognize performance is always relative. If I did 120% of my goals last year and you, Charles, did 140% of your goals, we both had a good year, but you're a higher performer. High performers understand you're always competing against who's ever best in whatever field that you're in.
You're right. And performance is relative, right? I mean, you can measure it against past performance for yourself, but you have to also know that in many cases it is relative and you're measuring yourself against the others, the other high performers within your industry, within your organization. Another point that I thought you made that was great, and my question to that would be, yes, you have to work more hours, but what if someone tells you, hey, I can get what they get in 50 hours done in 40 hours?
I work smart, not hard paradigm. It's one, we should all work smart. Let's start there. Cool. You work smart, happy for you. What are the odds that you work so much smarter than everybody else around you that you get a competitive advantage? Part of the challenge of people say I work smart is that assumes everybody else works dumb. You're the only person who's figured out how this works. Good for you. But also, oftentimes when I hear people say I work smart, I hear things like, oh, I don't hang out at the water cooler and socialize with people, or, I just get my stuff done and I go home. What that tells me is, oh, you're not spending time building the relationships that are probably the most valuable currency in your organization. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't perform well, but it probably does suggest something about your future and potential moving up in the organization. So I think and I think the hours point, who I was mentioning earlier, working smart is great, but if you work smart, then you're probably simply getting the exact same amount done in less time. That doesn't benefit your employer at all. If I say I work smart and I produce 20 widgets in 35 hours. Charles, you say I work hard, I produce 25 widgets in 40 hours. We both produce 25 widgets. So I'm just a fast average performer.
Very well said. So I love the approach, and I'd love for you to unpack this because I think this approach that you use in your book and in your research can help a lot of leaders as they're looking for tips, tools, and techniques they can use to improve their performance. Because there should be a rigor that you put what you're reading through, and many people just identify, okay, it's in the Harvard Business Review, it's in this article, it's in this magazine. This expert said it, so it must be true. I'm going to apply it, and when I apply it, it's going to work. But I love how you put it through additional rigor to say, it really needs to be conclusive science, not just research, not just science, but conclusive science. So if you could unpack that for our listeners, because I think that's a great framework for them to look through as a lens when they're examining tips that they want to incorporate into their work life.
And we phrase it as, or we approach it as, be a careful consumer. It's challenging as a leader to be a careful consumer. You only have so much time. You're not an expert in a lot of these topics. And so when a Harvard psychologist says that X is true, you're more than likely to believe, well, X must be true. That's a smart person. Look at the name on the institution. The challenge is that there are still people who like to become famous, make money by relabeling old phenomenon, by not doing proper research. And so when somebody says, hey, I heard about this brilliant new idea, or they come to us saying, I have one, we typically put it through three screens. Kind of the lowest level of proof is we just call research. And research is, we do research, we do nice research at our firm, McKinsey does research, but research depends on your belief in the person doing that research. So if Charles Good comes out with a new research paper, if I believe that Charles does good work, fantastic. But it might not have been published in a peer-reviewed academic journal. We don't know what the selection process was for those participants. We don't know if it was analyzed properly. But if I believe Charles does good work, I'll believe it. If I don't think he does good work, I won't. So that's the lowest level of proof. And 95% of what we all see out there is research. A consulting firm or even lower. BuzzFeed did a study. They found X equals Y. It's may be true, but would I stake my company on it? No. Next level above that, we'll call science. Science is someone did a carefully controlled experiment, normally going to be some academics. They published it in what we would call a peer-reviewed academic journal. So they lay out the entire experiment, why they did it, what the results were. And then all of us can look at that and say, either I believe what they found or I don't believe what they found. But at least all the facts are in front of us about what did they do, how did they do it? What did they find? Highest level of proof, we call it conclusive science. There's not a lot of science that's truly conclusive, but we think it's a decent label. It means that 100 scientists did the exact same experiment, and almost every time they came out with the same answers. So that's kind of the belt and suspenders level of confidence that it looks pretty darn true. Even if it might not hold up in 50 years, it looks good for now. So those are our three screens. Is it research? Is it science? Is it conclusive science? Everybody needs to come to their comfort point as to what their screen is. But we like going at least to that science level to say, at least make sure there's a decent experiment doing it, not simply that somebody's trying to sell you a product is advertising that level of proof.
Well, and that's the level of proof that you use for these 8 steps, which I think are great. And they're proven steps. They're not anything that's new. And I think a lot of these are common sense, but common sense isn't necessarily common practice. So now I'd love to go through these and we'll touch upon maybe all 8, but I'd like to go deeper into 1 or 2 of these. And why don't we go ahead and start with that first one? Step 1, set big goals. Why are big goals important? And then the part 2 of that is why call them a promise instead of a goal?
Sure. I'm glad you started there because, as we write about in the book, the single largest thing any of us could do to be higher performers is to set great goals, just flat out. I mean, I love the other steps in the book, but if you do none of those, at least set great goals. And we talk about that being a factor of a few things. The science is very clear that we are motivated by challenge. We are motivated by challenge. So if Charles is my boss and Charles, you say, Mark, jump a foot in the air, I'll give you $1. I'll try and jump a foot. If you say 2 feet, $2, I'm going over 2 feet, 3 feet, $3. I'm going to keep going until either I'm too exhausted to jump higher or I don't see the reward matching the task. So if you say 4 feet, I say $4. You say, nope, still $3, then I might see that as a misaligned incentive. But up until that point, I'm going to respond to your challenge with more effort every time. So a lot of us were raised in, with the phrase stretch goals somewhere in our mind. Every goal should be a stretch goal because we should be going to your earlier citing what we had in the book, theoretical maximum performance. What's your theoretical maximum performance this year? You're going to know that if you set 3, maybe 4, but I prefer 3 really big, challenging goals. But big also goes to few. You can't have 10 big, challenging goals. You're going to kill yourself. So the balance is 3 goals, maybe 4, but they have to be really big, juicy deliverables that are a little bit scary to you, are probably difficult to meet, and really difficult to exceed. Now, on the promise part, that's not using kind of a cute word trick. It's, oh, Mark calls it a promise, not a goal. No, it's really intended to elevate the importance of this in that We all make goals and we try to achieve our goals. And some years we do and some years we don't. But how many times do you make somebody a promise and not try exceptionally hard to deliver on that promise? I would much rather hear from my team members, what are the three big promises you're making to deliver to this company this year? That's all I care about. What's the top line? I know you have 100 things underneath that to do. Cool. You get that done. I care about the three big promises.
That's great. And to make sure, the other thing that I thought was really insightful was make them brief. There should be no bullet points underneath these. Your objective is to deliver on the promise. You don't get credit for delivering on the activities that contribute to the goal. I think that's spot on and profound, and more people need to recognize that.
Yeah, I think we all like getting credit for stuff we do rather than stuff we deliver. And the tough lesson is you had a goal. Did you meet it? Did you not meet it? If you were really busy and didn't meet it, I'm not sure that's what we're looking for.
Now, step four of that process is the simple goal concept, and it's simple. SIM is an acronym for specific, important, and measurable. So perhaps you can go through that framework briefly and just give them some more insights on how to create this type of goal.
Sure. Many of us were raised with SMART goals. There's nothing wrong with SMART goals. And this simple framework isn't going to revolutionize anybody's lives, but we do think it elevates the quality of goal setting a little bit. Simple is simply an acronym for specific, important, and measurable. SIM for the simple. Specific, just what it sounds like. What exactly are you going to deliver? And again, that's the short list, not the long list. What's the outcome you're promising me? For important, that to me is what's most meaningful and what separates us from a SMART methodology. You can set SMART goals that aren't important because it's more of a technical way of writing a goal. Important says if you're writing this down, it should matter to the boss, to your boss, it should matter to the company. This should be a pretty big deal. Measurable, just what it sounds like. How am I going to know if you have done this, done a really good job, kind of good job, not as good of a job? So it's a simple framework. If you want to stick with SMART, great. We do think simple elevates the quality of the goal just a little bit.
Wonderful. Well, let's move to step two, and that's behave to perform. The science about how behavior drives performance, that you'll be a higher performer if you do the following. And you mentioned a few things through your research. Understanding yourself is critical, choosing the right behaviors. And you list two different categories: behave like a transformational leader, and then behave like a performance driver. And then the third step is to adapt quickly. You know how to quickly and easily show performance driving behaviors. So, speak a little bit on those right behaviors, especially on how to behave like a transformational leader.
Sure. I think there are two pieces there. I think the first one around self awareness is probably the starting point before I even worry about being a transformational leader. We have in the book an 11 question survey developed by Dr. Bob Hogan, who's probably the leading personality psychologist out there. He did a great little survey for us summarizing their derailer survey. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with derailers, think of derailers as behaviors that are turned up too high. There are behaviors that might have been a strength at one time, but when you overdo it, it becomes a big deal. Quick example, I'm a skeptical guy. Now, a little bit of skepticism is good. No one's going to take advantage of you. But if you turn that dial up too high, you're skeptical of every piece of data people bring you, and oh, I don't believe that. Well, that guy's no good, and their research. That's going to put distance in between you and other people. That's a great example of a derailer because a little bit of that behavior, fantastic. Too much, and you're just the annoying guy who beats up on everybody else's data. We all have those derailers, and we list them in the book. And we're likely to show them under stress when our guard is down, and they're guaranteed to mess up our careers. So the most important first step is recognize what your likely derailers are and teach yourself, and this takes some effort, teach yourself to spot when you're about to display that or identify the typical scenarios when you're going to display it. For example, I am very high in one of the derailers called reserve. Now, reserve means I'm a bit of an introvert. I tend to work quietly. I don't socialize as much as I should. And especially under stress, I'm going to double down on those. And so I've learned to recognize, hey, when you're stressed, Mark, you tend not to ask other people questions. You tend not to reach out to people. These are all things that don't help you. And so kind of recognizing, hey, I'm about to show a behavior that's not productive. What should I do instead? is absolutely essential. So I would start with, before even worrying about transformational, make sure you know what's going to mess up your career, those overdone strengths or derailers that'll get in the way. And again, there's a quick quiz in the book on that. Transformational behaviors. It doesn't mean you're transforming people, but it means that you are a leader who sets a very clear vision, who shows concern for their team members, but is still able to drive very high performance. And it's an elegant balance. It's an elegant balance to say people feel valued and feel respected, but also feel that steady tug of performance that says, oh, Mark, you need to move forward one big step every single year. And that's a non negotiable. And I'm going to help you get there. And we're going to get there together. But the one step forward, that's going to happen. So there's that very careful balance that transformational leaders display, where there's definitely inspiration and there's care, but there's a strong performance foundation underneath it all.
You're right. Those derailers, which are hardwired in your company's practices, you just have to know what are those derailers for you. It's part of that fixed 50%, part of your core personality. You can't fix them, but like you said, you can become more aware of them and get off of autopilot sooner so you can course correct quicker in that moment, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a behaviorist in that I believe you can behave any way you want to if you really want to. And so people say things like, well, that's just how I am. I was born this way. That is a load. You might have been born that way. It doesn't mean that you cannot change the behavior that you want to display. I show up different than my core personality all the time. Why? Because I want to make a different impression than my core personality might display.
Let's move to step three, grow yourself faster. The more you grow in the right areas, the more likely you are to be a high performer. You use the 70-20-10 mantra. I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit for our listeners and just give them some insights as far as what time, because this is what it speaks to, what time should you spend in each type of development area?
Sure. 70-20-10 is a nice little piece of science that says we tend to develop most quickly through the experiences that we have. So, about 70% of who we are is because of the experiences that have shaped us over our life. About 20% of what shapes us comes from influencing by others. It might be getting feedback, watching other people, and about 10% comes from formal learning. Now, some people might say, oh, you're telling me that my master's degree or my PhD is worth nothing. That's not what the 10% means. It means it's a very good foundation on which you are going to build the rest of your learning. Here's the challenge. In most organizations, what does development look like? Hey, Charles, you should take that class. Hey, Charles, here's another program you should do. Instead of saying, hey, Charles, we've got this really big, challenging assignment at APAC, and it's going to be a stretch for you, but it's going to grow your career quickly. The second conversation is the one that we should be having, especially for your highest potential leaders that you're managing, or if you want to move quickly in the organization, you need to figure out which are the experiences that are going to grow you most quickly. And some help in determining what those are. First of all, there's going to be some adversity in that. If it's an easy experience, you're not going to learn anything or prove anything to anybody. It should be visible, meaning somebody important is going to know if you did a good job or didn't do a good job. It should be diverse. If it's the same experience you've done 100 times, no one cares, right? You know, the 100th time, big deal. So thinking about the next experience that you get, it should be one that adds resume value instantly. So that's always a good way to screen. Will my resume look better if I do this experience well? And then is it big and juicy? Do important people care about it? Is it going to be tough? So I'll actually prove something if I do it. And is it different than an experience that I've had before? If we focus on that 70 part of the 70-20-10, we're all going to grow ourselves faster.
And you mentioned a great concept that one of our dear friends, Marshall Goldsmith, really kind of brought to the mainstream, and that's that feed forward. So when you give feedback to someone, put it in that process or that template instead of giving them feedback. Why is that so important to distinguish between the two, Mark?
First, shout out to Marshall. I would not be where I am without Marshall. He came to me when I was a young consultant at Hewitt Associates in 2001 and said, we should write a book together. And I thought, I've never written a book. He's like, no, but it's us. I'll write it and you'll be part of it. I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. And that led to a lot of what I do every day. So love Marshall. Feed forward is about saying there's nothing more frustrating than being told to change something that you cannot change. Now, how do we do that? Oh, Charles, in that meeting, you interrupted Susie a few times. You shouldn't do that. Charles thinks, yeah, that was yesterday. I can't stop interrupting Susie now, as opposed to Charles, love the ideas that you bring out at meetings. Susie sometimes gets a little annoyed when people ask questions over a presentation. Just wait till the end of her presentations. We've got plenty of time for Q&A, and I really want your stuff to get out there. Exact same behavior I'm commenting on. One thing Charles can't do anything about. One is saying, hey, this is good stuff. Here's a different way of doing it. It may sound minor, but it's incredibly important if you want to drive positive change, because most people don't like being critiqued, which is you did something badly in the past. But most people are not going to object to you trying to make them a higher performer with a helpful suggestion.
Great advice. Love it. It works. Everyone hopefully can adopt that more than giving feedback. That approach is really simple yet quite powerful. Let's then move to step number 4, and that's to connect. Relationships supplement poor performance. Big network, big results. Perhaps you can share a few of those best practices around connecting and networking with others, maybe especially with how you would do it better with your boss.
Sure. And you underscore the key point. It matters. Now, for an introvert like me, the thought that networking matters is a very scary thought. But I'm compelled by the science. And the science says people who connect to your exact points are going to be more successful. And you highlight probably the best place to start, which is your relationship with your boss. Now, some people, when I even bring up that much, say, oh, I'm not a kiss ass. I'm not that type of person. It's like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about simply treating your boss like a friend. Bosses like having cups of coffee as well. Bosses like being asked about their weekend. Bosses like being told they had a great presentation. So much of becoming having a good relationship with your boss is treating them like a human being, not like a distant individual who is a level above you. And you pointed out the science is really clear, whether it's good or bad. People who have stronger relationships with their boss move up more quickly. They even get higher performance reviews, even if their objective performance is not that good. Now, that's not a good long term strategy, but it does suggest the power of that relationship. And so a lot of it goes to build your friendship with the boss the same way you build your friendship with anybody else. Hey, you want to go grab a cup of coffee? Or, hey, did you watch the Cubs over the weekend? And see, the same types of things you do with anybody else to build that relationship will work with your boss just as well.
Well, and some of the ways that I found that really helps is help them in what matters to them, make them look good, and flatter them. You mentioned some good studies through your research that state how much flattery is too much. There really isn't a theoretical maximum on this. People like to be complimented and flattered, and obviously you have to do it the right way, and it can come off as insincere at times. But really, those two key things, I think, really will help you become a stronger connector with your boss, and especially if you want a genuine relationship with them, that they feel like you really care about them and you're trying to establish a friendship versus just trying to be coercive or trying to do it for political reasons.
Yeah, I think the flattery point is an interesting one. It is clear that most of us love being told good things about ourselves. And there's not really a point at which we're going to say, oh, please don't tell me anything good about myself. Even if we say it, we don't really mean it. And so, yeah, telling people good things about them, even if you have to fudge a little bit, isn't the worst thing in the world.
Well, let's now go to step number 5, and that's maximize your fit. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I just want to unpack it a little bit, and that's making sure that your personal capabilities and your interests match your company needs. So perhaps you can go into a little more detail on what that really means.
Yeah, I would suggest this is probably one of the tougher ones. So I'm going to spend only a little bit of time. We've got a nice tool in the book to help people to map themselves. Two big questions that you need to ask here. Do you know where your company is going in terms of the types of capabilities they're looking for? So let's say you're in an entrepreneurial company, they're growing, they're evolving, they're becoming more stable, more structured. You might have been great in that entrepreneurial situation. What do you need to win in that new environment where things are more routine, more operationalized? because the same you who shows up in that new environment might not be a hypo, but that's not what they're looking for anymore. So understanding where is my company going, what capabilities are going to be considered to be high potential, and then the classic question of where am I? What does that gap look like, and how can I close that gap as quickly as possible? So maximize your fit is really saying no matter how your company changes, you want to be seen as the person with the right capabilities to win at that time.
Very well said. Next step is step 6. I love this step, fake it. It deals kind of with imposter syndrome, but you make a very good point. Every day we fake it at work for very good reasons. Our companies and our coworkers need us to. As your career involves and evolves, your continued high performance will require that you show new behaviors. And how fast you adapt to these behaviors will help differentiate you as a high performer. And the science you state is very clear. Faking does work, correct?
Faking absolutely works. Now, it absolutely works for a pretty obvious reason. Most of the time, you're faking a better behavior. You're faking a better you. If I'm not interrupting people in our team meetings, then people don't say, oh, he must be faking being a decent person. They say, thank God he stopped talking all the time in team meetings. Most of the time, the behaviors that we fake are ones that people wish we were displaying anyways. We just felt uncomfortable or unable to display that behavior. And I think the critical part here is it's not about becoming a fake you. I get that sometimes when I'm doing a speech on this topic. Oh, I need to be the genuine me. Well, actually, no, you don't. But it means in the moments that you need to fake, fake. I do that a lot when I'm doing big speeches. I might not be up for a big speech, but people want me to go out there and be entertaining for an hour. It's funny. I tell people I fake Marshall Goldsmith. If you've ever seen Marshall Goldsmith on stage, you know he was the most warm, engaging, gregarious, friendly, likable, good humored person in the world. That is not naturally me. So if I need to get up for a speech and I'm about to walk on stage, I don't say, oh, what would Marshall Goldsmith do in this situation? I say, be Marshall Goldsmith. And you put on that actor's face and you walk out there and you play the role that you're supposed to play. Now, the challenge is for 15 years, we've been told, oh, you should be your authentic self, Charles, authentic, special, genuine self, which people take to believe is don't change a thing. And I think that's a very dangerous assumption that our genuine, authentic selves are perfect in every single situation. I'd suggest we all have a lot of wonderful qualities, but there may be one or two things that we could do better. Great. In those instances, even if you don't like the behavior, but you know it's going to be successful, fake that behavior.
Great advice. And I think that runs counter to a lot of articles and research that has come out regarding imposter syndrome. And it's, we aren't saying that's a bad thing, but it's just in certain situations where you're trying to adapt and evolve and transform yourself into a more effective leader, whether you're a new and emerging leader or you're moving up the ranks, you need to have different behaviors. Because like Marshall said, what served you in the past is not going to serve you now. So you need to evolve over time if you want to be that high performer and stay that way as your career evolves. Now, step 7, commit your body. So the thing that I took away here from this step the most was sleep matters most. Exercise has some minor effects. Diet has no direct effect. So give us your insights on this and maybe give some best practices around sleep.
Sure. First, I was so disappointed that I did not find research that said that exercise matters. Because I thought if I could say, honey, I'm going to the gym. It's not about me, it's about the science. But I did not find that research. Searching through anything you can control about your body and high performance at work, it was very clear. Sleep is the number one factor. In fact, for all the other 6 steps before that one in the book, none of those are going to be effective unless you're managing your sleep properly. The challenging point, there's been so much about sleep that's come out over the past few years. Sorting through all the information and figuring out, well, what exactly should I do has been challenging. So I sorted through it in this chapter. Where should you focus? You should focus on quality of sleep, quality over quantity. If you have to choose, quality over quantity. Why? Quality or low quality sleep is going to affect what we call your executive functions, strategic thinking, creativity, teaming well with others, the things that you're probably getting paid to do well. So if you have low quality sleep, it's going to undercut at the heart of what you should be doing well. The scientists have very clear advice as well for how should you increase quality of sleep. It normally sounds like you should live like a monk. They say you should sleep in a cold room, a dark room, a quiet room, no device reading, no pets on the bed, no caffeine. My advice to people on that is always pick one of those factors, turn the dial up. Slightly colder room, slightly darker room, one dog on the bed instead of two dogs on the bed. But quality of sleep matters a lot. Quantity, not unimportant. The challenge there is the advice is kind of all over the place. National Sleep Foundation says 6 to 10 hours. Okay, well, that's a 4 hour difference. Is it six or is it 10? If you sort through a lot of articles, it shows up at about 6.5 to 7.5 hours is ideal. And those smart scientists have also studied what if I can't get the quality or the quantity of sleep that I need. Good news is you can make up for up to an hour of low quality sleep with a 10-minute nap. They studied all sorts of ways of making up for it. That's the number one way to make up for it. Up to a hour of low quality sleep is a 10-minute nap. Low quantity, our old friend caffeine does exactly what it's supposed to do. Low quantity of sleep affects our basic functions. Where are my car keys? What's that guy's name again? Caffeine fixes those challenges. It activates those basic systems. So on sleep, quality over quantity, cool, dark, quiet room. On quantity, it's at least 6.5 to 7.5. You're probably going to be in good shape if you do those two things well.
Well, I want to get to the last one, and that's step 8, and that's avoid distractions. So perhaps you can give me maybe one or two distractions that you see are pretty prevalent or common these days with everyone, and one or two tips to get around those or to try to avoid them more effectively.
Sure. Why do I say avoid distractions? Well, you and I have just talked about 7 scientifically proven things you can do to be a higher performer at work. And I guarantee you, if you do those, you will increase performance. So, belt and suspenders level of confidence. Challenges, back to being that careful consumer. This afternoon, in somebody's inbox, will be some new tip or some new technique for being an even better leader or even better performer. And you'll read it and you'll think, oh, that does kind of make sense. I should do that, ignoring the 7 things that are absolutely proven to work. So, avoiding distractions means focus on the few things that work and be that careful consumer because there are going to be things that come out, things like focus on your strengths. Well, there's no science behind focus on your strengths. People who focus on their strengths like working on development better than people focus on their weaknesses. People focus on their weaknesses move forward faster than people who only focus on their strengths. Things like grit, a very good selling book. Grit is basically a part of personality. It's a somewhat unchangeable part of your personality. So while the concept might be right, grittier people are more successful. Back to the fixed 50%, a lot of your grittiness is pretty much programmed. You could dial it up a little bit, of course, but saying, oh, handing that book out to your entire team, be more gritty, is kind of like saying, change your hair color. Like it's probably not going to happen over the long term.
Thank you for providing those insights. Thank you so much for your time today, Mark. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
Sure. Well, you can go to our website, talentstrategygroup.com. All of our articles, all of our videos, all of our webinars are there absolutely free. And if you want to reach out, there's a contact box on that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today, and look forward to continuing that conversation perhaps at another time on your other great book.
Thanks so much, Charles.
If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to share with others and post about it on social media. You can also go to our YouTube channel, which has video recordings of all the episodes of this podcast, along with bite-sized segments called single servings that are designed to answer your most pressing leadership and management questions. Remember, until next time, it's not what you know that counts, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.